The vast chamber fell silent as Captain Jack Reed stepped through the enormous doorway. His boots echoed against the polished stone floor, each step deliberate and measured despite his racing heart. The palace of the Vestrans was unlike anything human eyes had witnessed before. Towering walls of iridescent material that seemed to shift colors with the changing light, and ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. Behind Jack, 3 fellow humans from the diplomatic team followed at a respectful distance. They had been briefed extensively about proper protocol, but nothing in their training had prepared them for the alien majesty of this place. "Remember," Jack whispered to his team without turning his head, "no sudden movements." The Vestrans lined both sides of the chamber, tall, elegant beings with exoskeletons that gleamed like polished armor. Their 4 arms remained perfectly still at their sides, and their compound eyes tracked the humans' every move. What humans might interpret as insectoid features were arranged with a strange, unsettling beauty. At the far end of the hall, atop a raised platform, waited their host. Queen Lyra of the Vestrans was immediately distinguishable from her subjects. Nearly 7 feet tall, her exoskeleton displayed intricate patterns that seemed to glow from within. A translucent crest rose from her head like a crown, and when she moved, it was with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for a being with an external skeleton. "Captain Jack Reed of Earth," announced a Vestran official in a voice that sounded like chimes. "Leader of the human diplomatic mission." Jack stopped at the designated spot 20 paces from the throne, and bowed deeply, just as he had been instructed. "Your Majesty, I bring greetings from Earth. We are honored by your invitation and eager to establish peaceful relations between our worlds." The Queen tilted her head slightly. When she spoke, her voice was surprisingly melodic, translated through the advanced devices the humans wore in their ears. "Captain Reed, your journey was long, yet you appear resilient." Jack maintained his diplomatic smile. "Humans adapt well to space travel, Your Majesty." The Queen rose from her throne in a single fluid motion. The Vestran officials on either side seemed startled by this break in protocol, their antennae quivering slightly. "Approach," she commanded. Jack glanced briefly at his team, seeing the concern in their eyes, before walking forward alone. The distance between himself and the alien monarch closed with each step. He could now see the complex facets of her eyes, thousands of tiny surfaces reflecting his own image back at him. The Queen circled him slowly, examining him from every angle. Jack remained still, fighting the instinct to turn and keep her in his sight. "Fascinating," she said, more to herself than to him. The data was correct. Jack wasn't sure how to respond. This wasn't in the briefing. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "we've brought proposals for trade, scientific exchange." "That can wait," she interrupted, coming to stand directly before him. She was close enough now that he could feel a strange heat radiating from her exoskeleton. "You will stay in the palace tonight." One of Jack's team members stepped forward. "Your Majesty, our protocol's August." The Queen turned her gaze to the woman, who immediately fell silent. "Your team will be accommodated elsewhere," the Queen stated firmly. "Captain Reed remains here." The royal attendants moved forward, as if this had been the plan all along, gesturing for Jack's team to follow them out a side entrance. "Wait," Jack called. "We should stay together." Queen Lyra raised one elegant armored hand. "Do not fear, Captain. No harm will come to you or your people, but there are matters we must discuss, privately." As his team was escorted away, Jack felt deeply alone in the alien throne room. The Queen's compound eyes studied him with unmistakable intensity. Whatever the Vestrans had brought humans across the galaxy for, Jack realized it was far more personal than simple diplomacy. "Come, Captain," the Queen said, extending one of her 4 hands toward a doorway behind the throne. "Your destiny awaits." Jack followed Queen Lyra through a series of winding corridors. The walls pulsed with a soft blue light that seemed to follow their movements. 2 royal guards trailed at a distance, their crystalline weapons gleaming. "Your people believe this is a standard diplomatic mission," The Queen said, her voice echoing slightly in the narrow passage. It is not. Jack's training had prepared him for many scenarios, but the growing unease in his stomach told him this situation was unique. Then what is it, Your Majesty? They entered a vast chamber unlike the throne room. This space was clearly scientific in nature, with strange equipment and glowing screens displaying what looked like DNA sequences. Several veteran scientists looked up from their work, their antennae twitching in what Jack guessed was surprise. This is our genetic research facility, Queen Lyra explained. The most advanced in our empire. One of the scientists approached, bowing deeply. The tests confirm it, Your Majesty. He is the one. The Queen's outer shell seemed to brighten slightly. Jack recognized it as their version of emotional display, though he couldn't interpret its meaning. Captain Reed, she said, turning to face him directly. My people are dying. The bluntness of her statement caught Jack off guard. I'm sorry to hear that, Your Majesty. Is there some disease we could help with? Earth has advanced medical. Not a disease, she interrupted. A failure in our very essence. She gestured to one of the screens showing spiraling patterns of genetic code. For 10 generations, my people have experienced genetic degradation. Each new hatching produces fewer viable offspring. Each queen's fertility diminishes. Jack studied the displays, recognizing enough of the patterns to understand the severity of what he was seeing. Our scientists discovered something remarkable about humans, she continued, moving to another screen. Your species possesses genetic adaptability unlike anything we've encountered. Where our DNA breaks down, yours finds ways to repair itself. A chill ran down Jack's spine. And that's why I'm here. The Queen stepped closer, her tall form looming over him. We've tested thousands of human genetic samples. Yours is unique. It contains specific markers that could be compatible with our royal bloodline. Jack took an involuntary step backward. Compatible how, exactly? To put it simply, Captain Reed, you may hold the key to saving my entire species. The Queen's voice softened to a tone he hadn't heard before. I am the last queen of my line. Without intervention, I will produce no heirs. My people will slowly fade away. One of the scientists approached with a small device that resembled a scanner. With your permission, we would like to conduct more detailed tests. Non-invasive, I assure you. Jack's mind raced through diplomatic protocols and his duty to Earth. Nothing covered this situation. And if I refuse? The Queen's 4 hands clasped together in what seemed like a gesture of pleading. We would respect your choice. We are not barbarians. But I ask you to consider the fate of billions. Jack looked around the lab, at the earnest faces of the alien scientists, at the genetic displays showing clear patterns of decline. Let me contact my team first, he said finally. They need to know I'm safe. The Queen nodded. Of course, but what we discuss here must remain between us for now. There are factions among my people who oppose any solution involving outside species. As if on cue, a loud commotion erupted from the corridor outside. The guards tensed, moving protectively toward their queen. A Vestran official burst into the laboratory, his exoskeleton dark with agitation. Your Majesty, the High Council demands to know why you've isolated the human captain. They're calling for an emergency session. Queen Lyra's eyes fixed on Jack with an intensity that made him shiver. It seems our time is limited, Captain Reed. I need your answer soon. Will you help us understand why you, specifically you, might be the salvation we've searched for? Jack looked from the Queen to the angry official, suddenly understanding that he stood at the center of not just a scientific dilemma, but a political one as well. I'll hear you out, he said finally. But I need to know everything. Morning light filtered through the crystalline windows of Jack's quarters, casting rainbow patterns across the smooth floor. He had slept poorly, his mind racing with the implications of Queen Lyra's revelation. Today would begin what the Vestrans call the compatibility trials. A soft chime announced the arrival of his escort. 2 royal guards and a slender Vestran scientist named Trill waited outside his door. Captain Reed. Trill greeted him, her voice higher-pitched than the Queen's. I hope your rest was adequate. We have much to accomplish today. Jack followed them to a large chamber filled with equipment both recognizable and utterly alien. Several Vestran scientists busied themselves with preparations, their movements quick and precise. These tests will measure your physical and mental responses to various stimuli, Trill explained. Nothing will cause pain, but some may be uncomfortable. Jack removed his jacket as instructed and sat in a chair that adjusted itself to his human form. Let's get started. The first test measured his cellular response to synthetic Vestran proteins. Jack watched on a nearby screen as his blood cells reacted to the foreign material in ways that clearly excited the scientists. Remarkable, Trill chittered to her colleagues. The human cells don't reject the compounds. They incorporate them. Is that unusual? Jack asked. For any other species, yes, she replied. Vestran biology is typically incompatible with all other life forms we've encountered. Yet your cells adapt. The morning progressed through increasingly complex tests. Jack solved puzzles that shifted and changed as he worked. He navigated virtual environments that would have disoriented most humans, let alone aliens. With each completed task, the scientists' excitement grew. During a brief rest period, Jack noticed a group of Vestrans watching from an observation deck. Unlike the scientists, these wore elaborate decorative armor and regarded him with what he interpreted as hostility. Who are they? He asked Trill. She glanced up nervously. Members of the Conservative Coalition. They believe Vestran purity must be maintained at all costs, even extinction. Before Jack could respond, an alarm blared through the chamber. The scientists scattered to check equipment, but Trill grabbed Jack's arm. We must move. Now. She pulled him toward a side door, just as a section of ceiling collapsed where he had been standing moments before. Guards rushed in, surrounding them in a protective formation. What happened? Jack demanded as they hurried through a narrow corridor. Equipment failure, Trill said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it. Very convenient timing. Queen Lyra waited in the secure chamber, her normally iridescent exoskeleton darkened with concern. Captain, are you harmed? I'm fine, Jack assured her, though I'm starting to think not everyone wants these tests to succeed. The Queen's compound eyes fixed on him. Perceptive. The coalition grows bolder. A royal guard approached with a data tablet. The preliminary results, Your Majesty. Queen Lyra studied the information, her posture straightening with what Jack now recognized as excitement. Your adaptability exceeds our highest projections, Captain Reed. Your immune response, cognitive flexibility, even your physical resilience, all far beyond Vestran capabilities. Those are just human traits, Jack said. Nothing special about me specifically. That's where you're wrong, the Queen replied. Your particular genetic makeup shows markers we've never seen before. You possess something unique even among humans. Jack crossed his arms. So what happens now? One final test, she said, but not in the laboratory. I need to see how you respond to a real crisis. As if summoned by her words, a tremendous explosion rocked the palace. Alarms shrieked and guards rushed to defensive positions. It seems, Queen Lyra said calmly, that opportunity has arrived. The chamber doors burst open as a group of armed intruders, Vestrans in unmarked armor, stormed in. The royal guards moved to protect their queen, but were quickly outnumbered. Jack reacted instinctively. He grabbed a ceremonial staff from the wall and swept it at the legs of the nearest attacker, sending the Vestran crashing to the floor. With movements no Vestran could predict, he darted between two more attackers, causing them to collide. When the brief skirmish ended, 3 intruders lay subdued, and the others had retreated. The royal guard stared at Jack with new respect. Queen Lyra approached him, reaching out with 2 of her 4 hands to grasp his shoulders. Now I understand, she said softly. It is not just your genes that could save us. It is your humanity itself. Your unpredictability, your instinct, your courage. These are the qualities my people have lost. For the first time, Jack felt something beyond diplomatic duty. Something about the Queen's words resonated with him on a personal level. "I still have questions," he said. "And you shall have answers," she promised. "But first, we must secure the palace." The palace gardens offered a strange kind of peace. Alien plants with geometric patterns grew in perfect symmetry, their colors shifting slightly as Jack passed by. 2 days had passed since the attack, and security had tightened throughout the royal complex. Queen Lyra walked beside him. Her long strides slowed to match his human pace. Without her formal regalia, she seemed almost approachable, though no less regal. "These flowers respond to emotions," she explained, gesturing to a cluster of hexagonal blooms that brightened as they neared. "They were once found throughout our world. Now they grow only in protected spaces like this." "Another casualty of the genetic decline?" Jack asked. "Yes, like much of our ecosystem." The Queen paused by a small pond where creatures that resembled a cross between fish and crystals swam in precise patterns. "Our world is becoming simpler, less diverse." Jack watched as one fish broke formation, swimming in a quirky zigzag before rejoining its group. Not all of them follow the rules. The Queen's eyes followed the rebellious fish. A mutation. Rare now. Once, such variations were common among our species too. They continued walking, 2 guards following at a respectful distance. Jack had begun to recognize the subtle differences in Vestran expressions, the way their antennae positioned, the shifting colors of their exoskeletons. The Queen's current coloration suggested contemplation with hints of concern. "There is something I must show you," she said finally. "Something few outsiders have seen." She led him to a section of wall that opened at her touch, revealing the hidden elevator. They descended deep below the palace, the temperature dropping noticeably. "What is this place?" Jack asked as they emerged into a vast underground chamber. "Our archive," the Queen answered, "and temporary home to others like yourself." Jack froze. Other humans. Here. The chamber contained several dozen transparent pods. Inside most were humans, men and women of various ages and ethnicities, all apparently in peaceful sleep. "Before you react," Queen Lyra said quickly, noting his expression, "know that all are volunteers. Scientists, explorers, individuals who agreed to help our research. None were taken against their will." Jack approached the nearest pod, where a middle-aged man slept. "And when your tests are done, they are returned to their homes with altered memories of a research mission or expedition," Trill explained, emerging from a nearby workstation. "None remember their time here. None are harmed." Jack turned to face the Queen. "Why keep this secret from Earth?" "Politics," she answered simply. "Your governments might misinterpret our intentions. We needed data, not conflict." "And what did you learn from them?" Jack gestured to the sleeping volunteers. "That humans are remarkably diverse," Trill interjected. "Each person we studied showed unique adaptability patterns, but none matched what we needed until you." The Queen moved to a different section of the chamber, where a single ornate pod sat apart from the others. Inside was a smaller version of a Vestran, clearly young. "My daughter," the Queen said softly. "The last royal birth. Her genetic structure is unstable. Without intervention, she will be the final generation." For the first time, Jack saw vulnerability in the mighty Queen. Her usual perfect posture sagged slightly as she gazed at her sleeping child. "I understand duty, Captain Reed. I was born to serve my people, to ensure our continuation. If I fail..." Jack studied the young princess, then looked back at the sleeping humans who had come before him. "How many others have you approached with this same request?" "None," the Queen answered. "The tests we conducted on the volunteers were preliminary. You are the first we've asked directly." She turned to face him fully, the only one whose genetic profile shows true compatibility. As they left the archive, Jack's mind raced with new questions and conflicting emotions. The weight of an entire species' survival pressed against his shoulders. "There's more at stake than just biology, isn't there?" he asked as they returned to the upper levels. "I've seen how the conservatives react to me. This is about the future of your society, too." The Queen's exoskeleton brightened slightly. Jack had come to recognize this as approval. "You perceive much, Captain." "Yes. For generations, my people have followed rigid patterns. We progress technologically, but have lost something essential: the ability to change, to feel deeply, to imagine new possibilities." "Human traits," Jack noted. "Traits we once possessed," the Queen corrected. "Traits we might regain with your help." They reached a balcony overlooking the capital city, its geometric towers gleaming in the afternoon light. For a moment, they stood in silence, the human explorer and the alien queen, separated by biology, but united by a growing understanding. "Tomorrow," Queen Lyra said, "you will meet the Royal Council. They must approve any final decision." She turned to him, her compound eyes somehow conveying earnestness despite their alien structure. "But know this, Jack Reed, whatever you decide, you have already changed us by your presence here." Jack woke to darkness and cold. His head throbbed painfully, and the metallic taste of blood lingered in his mouth. He tried to move but found his hands bound behind his back. This was not his quarters in the royal palace. "Our guest awakens," said a voice from the shadows. The Vestran speech patterns were recognizable, but the translator in Jack's ear was gone. A figure stepped forward, illuminated by dim blue light. Jack recognized the ornate armor of the Conservative Coalition. The Vestran was taller than most, with battle scars etched into his exoskeleton. "I am Commander Drez," the Vestran said in halting human English, "leader of those who would save our people from corruption." Jack tested his restraints. They were tight, but not impossible. "By kidnapping diplomatic guests." Bold strategy. Drez's antennae twitched in what Jack had learned was irritation. "Your humor is unnecessary. You are not harmed. Yet." Jack's eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing he was in some kind of storage facility. Crates bearing Vestran script lined the walls. No windows, one visible door, and 3 armed guards besides Drez. "The Queen will be looking for me," Jack said. "Counting on it," Drez replied. "But by then, it will be too late." The commander moved to a nearby console, bringing up images of the genetic research lab. "For generations, we protected our genetic purity. Now, in desperation, our Queen would dilute our very essence with alien material." "You'd rather face extinction?" Jack asked, slowly working on the bindings at his wrists. "If necessary." Drez's voice hardened. "Better to end proudly as Vestrans than continue as something tainted." Jack felt the restraints loosen slightly. He needed to keep Drez talking. "Pretty extreme view, considering your Queen believes I could save your species." "The Queen is blinded by fear," Drez said, turning back to face him. "Our scientists have worked for decades on solutions that wouldn't require outside contamination." "And how's that working out?" Jack managed to free one hand, but kept it behind his back. Drez stepped closer, leaning down to Jack's eye level. "You think yourself clever, human. But you understand nothing of our history, our—" Jack moved with explosive speed, headbutting the commander directly in his sensitive mouthparts. As Drez reeled backward, Jack broke free from his remaining restraints and rolled sideways, grabbing a metal tool from a nearby table. The guards rushed forward, but Jack had already positioned himself behind a stack of containers. He shoved the stack with all his strength, sending crates crashing down upon the approaching guards. In the confusion, Jack darted toward a ventilation duct he'd spotted earlier. His human size, smaller than the average Vestran, allowed him to squeeze through the opening that the larger aliens couldn't follow through. "Seal all exits," Drez shouted as Jack disappeared into the air system. Jack navigated through the cramped ducts, using light from occasional grates to guide him. He had no idea where in the city he was, but he needed to find a way to contact the palace. After 20 minutes of crawling, he found a larger junction where he could catch his breath. Through a nearby vent, he heard the unmistakable sounds of the city marketplace. Kicking out the grate, Jack dropped into an alley behind what appeared to be food stalls. Vestran civilians turned to stare at the disheveled human. Backing away in alarm, Jack knew he had minutes at best before Drez's forces found him. He spotted a public communication terminal nearby and dashed toward it, but couldn't decipher the alien controls. A young Vestran worker watched him curiously. "Palace," Jack said desperately, pointing at the device. "Queen Lyra. Emergency." The young Vestran hesitated, then stepped forward to operate the terminal. After a few moments, the screen displayed the royal insignia. On the far side of the market, soldiers in conservative coalition armor appeared, scanning the crowd. A voice came from the terminal. One of the Queen's advisors. Jack quickly explained his situation as the soldiers drew closer. The marketplace suddenly erupted with activity as royal guards descended from the sky on hover platforms, their weapons trained on the coalition forces. The civilians scattered, leaving Jack exposed in the center of the square. Commander Drez himself emerged, flanked by elite guards. "This changes nothing," he called out. "The people know the truth now." Before the standoff could escalate further, a larger transport appeared overhead. Queen Lyra herself descended, her royal armor gleaming in the sunlight. The marketplace fell silent as she approached. She moved past her guards, directly toward Jack. Without ceremony or hesitation, she wrapped two of her 4 arms around him and pulled him close against her exoskeleton. "You are the one I've been searching for," she declared, her voice carrying across the silent square. "The one who will save us all." The royal council chamber buzzed with tension. 12 Vestran elders sat in a semicircle, their compound eyes fixed on Jack. Queen Lyra occupied the central position, her posture rigid with formal dignity. Commander Drez stood in restraints to one side, his supporters having been arrested after the marketplace confrontation. 3 days had passed since Jack's escape. The incident had forced the Queen to publicly acknowledge the human's importance, turning what had been a secret scientific project into the most discussed topic across the Vestran Empire. "The Council recognizes Captain Jack Reed of Earth," announced an elderly Vestran with pale blue markings. "You may address us." Jack stepped forward, wearing a combination of his Earth uniform and Vestran ceremonial attire that the Queen had provided, a symbolic gesture not lost on the Council. "Honorable Council," Jack began, "I understand your concerns. You face extinction, and the solution before you involves an outsider, a human." Several council members shifted uncomfortably. One with elaborate red markings spoke up. "The genetic compatibility tests are compelling, but unprecedented. No species has ever merged genetic material with Vestrans before. And that is precisely the problem with your approach," Jack said. His time in captivity had given him a crucial insight. "You're looking for a quick fix, my DNA to patch yours. But that's treating the symptom, not the disease." Queen Lyra leaned forward slightly. "Explain, Captain." Jack moved to the central display and activated it with gestures he practiced with Trill. The screen showed comparative DNA structures, human and Vestran. "Your scientists focused on finding compatible genetic material," Jack said. "But what they should be studying is this." He highlighted a section of the human DNA. "Our adaptive mechanisms. Humans don't just have good genes, we have genes that change." The council members exchanged glances. The scientific advisor rose. "We have noted human adaptability, but the process of natural selection takes many generations." "For natural evolution, yes," Jack agreed. "But humans have accelerated that process through science. Our history is full of examples where we faced extinction-level threats and developed solutions by adapting our environment, our technology, and eventually ourselves." He turned to face Drez. "The commander isn't wrong to want to preserve what makes Vestrans unique. But true preservation isn't about remaining static. It's about maintaining your essence while evolving." Jack switched the display to show Earth's historical data. Humans faced similar crises throughout our history: plagues, environmental disasters, genetic bottlenecks. We survived not by remaining pure, but by embracing change. The Queen's exoskeleton shifted to a deeper hue that Jack now recognized as thoughtful consideration. "What exactly are you proposing, Captain?" "Don't just take my compatible genes," Jack said. "Study how human DNA repairs and adapts itself. Then develop a therapy that triggers your own adaptive mechanisms, ones that have gone dormant over generations of stability." The scientific advisor's antennae quivered with excitement. A genetic awakening rather than a merger. Theoretically possible, but we've never. "Because you've been thinking like Vestrans," Jack interrupted gently. "With respect, your species values order and predictability. Those are strengths, but they've limited your scientific approach." He turned back to the council. "I'm offering to stay and help your scientists, not as a genetic donor, but as a bridge between our ways of thinking. Humans can show you how to embrace uncertainty, to see problems from new angles." A counselor with green markings chittered softly. "This approach would take longer than a direct genetic solution, but would preserve what truly makes us Vestran," Queen Lyra noted, her eyes fixed on Dres, "and perhaps satisfy those concerned about purity." Dres's posture remained defiant, but Jack noticed a subtle shift in his antenna, the first hint of consideration. The head counselor rose. "We will need to deliberate on this proposal." Before they could continue, alarms blared throughout the chamber. A royal guard burst in, his exoskeleton dark with urgency. "Your Majesty, coalition forces have breached the genetic repository. They're attempting to destroy all research data and samples." The Queen stood immediately. "Secure the council chamber." Jack stepped forward. "Let me help. This is exactly when you need human thinking, when the rules no longer apply." Queen Lyra hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Captain Reed will accompany my personal guard. His insights may prove valuable." As they hurried from the chamber, Jack caught a glimpse of something he hadn't seen before in the Vestrans around him, a flicker of hope breaking through their rigid exteriors. For the first time, they were looking to him not just for his genetic material, but for the uniquely human perspective he brought. "The future of two species may rest on what happens next," the Queen said quietly as they prepared to defend their work. "Are you ready for that responsibility, Jack Reed?" Jack checked the Vestran weapon he'd been handed, its design foreign yet somehow intuitive in his grip. "Let's find out." The morning sun cast long shadows across the newly constructed human Vestran Academy. The building blended architectural styles from both worlds, clean Vestran geometric lines softened by curved human elements. 6 months had passed since the dramatic confrontation at the genetic repository. Jack stood at the main entrance, watching students file in. Young Vestrans moved with their characteristic precision, but now they walked alongside a small group of human scientists and educators who had volunteered for this unprecedented exchange program. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Queen Lyra appeared beside him, wearing simplified royal attire. In recent months, she had taken to spending more time outside the palace, directly engaging with her people. "Better than I imagined," Jack admitted. "When we were fighting off those coalition forces, I wasn't sure we'd get here." The battle at the repository had been brief but decisive. Jack's unconventional tactics had caught the attackers by surprise, and most had surrendered when they saw the Queen herself fighting alongside the human. More importantly, Commander Dres, watching from his detention cell, had been moved by Jack's willingness to risk his life to protect Vestran research. This dramatic turn had fractured the conservative coalition, with many members reconsidering their opposition. "The first treatment will be administered to my daughter tomorrow," the Queen said, her voice softening. "The scientists are confident." The breakthrough had come just 3 weeks after the council approved Jack's approach. By combining Vestran genetic science with human medical techniques, the research team had developed a therapy that reactivated dormant adaptation mechanisms in Vestran DNA. No human genetic material was needed, just the understanding of how human adaptability worked. I received word from Earth this morning, Jack said. The Federation has officially approved the exchange program. 20 more humans will arrive next month. Queen Lyra's exoskeleton rippled with pleasure colors. And you? Will you return with them when they leave? Jack's gaze moved to the Academy building. His quarters had been established in the East Wing, with a view of both the city and the distant mountains. My assignment here has been extended indefinitely. It seems Earth values having its ambassador close to the Vestran Queen. Inside the main hall, a group of students gathered around Trill, who had been appointed lead instructor. The former lab scientist had discovered a talent for teaching and now enthusiastically explained concepts that bridged both species' understanding of the universe. We've dedicated a wing to genetic diversity studies, the Queen explained as they toured the facility. Already, we're seeing the first signs of natural variation returning to Vestran births. They stopped at a laboratory where samples of the geometric flowers from the palace garden were being studied. A young Vestran researcher demonstrated how the plants now displayed subtle variations in their patterns, the first indicators that change was returning to their world. Later, as evening approached, Jack and the Queen stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The formal distance that had once existed between them had gradually diminished, replaced by something neither human nor Vestran vocabulary could quite define. "There is something I never told you," Queen Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something even my closest advisors do not know." Jack turned to her, noticing her exoskeleton had shifted to a deep, private color he'd rarely seen. "Before our scientists discovered humans, I experienced what my ancestors would have called a vision. I saw a being unlike any I knew, standing between my people and the darkness of extinction." Her compound eyes fixed on his face. "I saw you, Jack Reed, long before we met." "You didn't mention this when we first met," Jack said quietly. "Would you have believed me, or would you have thought it a manipulation?" She extended one of her hands, a gesture she had learned from humans. Some truths must wait for the right moment. Jack took her offered hand, the strange contrast of his soft skin against her exoskeleton no longer foreign to either of them. Below them, the city lights began to glow as darkness fell. In laboratories across the planet, Vestran scientists worked with new approaches inspired by human creativity. In Earth's major cities, Vestran representatives shared technologies developed through millennia of ordered progress. "What happens next?" Jack asked. The Queen's answer came with surprising simplicity. "We write the next chapter together." As night settled fully over the Academy, two figures, one human, one Vestran, remained on the balcony, two vastly different forms of life, finding common ground beneath the stars that had once separated them.